Okay. So now I am officially recording. You probably got a little notification at the top that says I am. So this could be presented in other platforms. So again, just keep your camera off or do not say anything if you don't want to be heard. But we are here I'm really excited to have, you'll see, Ben Greenzweig. He is the founder and president of the Living Water that he's going to speak on today. And we have Dr. Owen Muir, who is joining probably from New York, I'm guessing. And he is going to be over the medical director. Is that the actual title, correct? Of Living Water. So he's also joining to discuss this as well, with all of his vast experience in this. I know they joined for like a moment at the end of our staff meeting last week for those that were there. So we have a lot of we have both clinicians and admin on this call right now. So I think it's great. So it's important for admin to also know these things, and they're a very important piece of how we are successful. So I'm excited to see a combination of clinicians and administrative staff here. And we also, let's see, I wanted to share, we can offer a continuing education for this. I didn't announce this to everyone, so this is brand new information. So you can get an hour CE for free, no big deal. All you got to do is just take the survey, the quiz survey at the end. It'll be sent out automatically at noon via SurveyMonkey. And once I receive those, I'll send you your certificate. So another nice way to get a CE in there. So anywho, as I would like to go ahead and allow, again, keep your audio off unless you want to speak or have a question, but I'm going to monitor the chat. So if anyone has a question, I would first love if you all could put it in there, and or if you want to share something, let me know and I will interrupt as appropriate. So that way we can get that. But there will be a question, like a Q&A portion after more of the presentation part of things. So just keep that in mind. And okay, without further ado, unless Ben or Dr. Muir, you have anything to add to my little spiel of housekeeping things, then the floor is yours. I'm going to mute myself, but I can interject as needed. And like I said, I'll be monitoring the chat.
The one thing I want to say is, everyone has a right to not have their privacy violated. So if you don't want to talk, don't. But if you do want to ask a question, I love being interrupted. It makes it much more entertaining for me to have some interaction with other humans. I did like 8 years of improv comedy, so interaction with the audience is that's my lifeblood. I'll let Ben kind of introduce the talk. Do you want me to do the slide share, Ben?
I can do the slide share if you want.
Sure.
So thank you, Dr. Muir. And I just want to echo that. We'd like this to be as interactive as possible. Owen and I have had a bunch of these now, both in person and virtual. So this is going to be a fireside chat with slides to guide the conversation. And we encourage everyone to certainly ask as many questions as they come up. No need to save them at the end. I want to first start by thanking Ileana and the Center for hosting us here today. As people on this call, and if those are watching this on demand, Ileana is one of our illustrious board advisors for Living Water Mental Health Brain Treatment Solutions. We'll get into that in a moment. But I also want to be very clear that we're going to be talking about these novel treatments, but we are not sitting here telling you that this is the only path and this is the path for everybody. All of us on this call and all of us involved want patients to get better. We want them to improve. We want them to have healthier lifestyles. This is a tool in the toolbox. This is, as you'll see, a highly effective treatment. It is not the only treatment for lots of reasons. So while we appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation in a very frank manner, we are all aligned to help patients get access to as many safe, legal, and effective tools as possible in order to live better and healthier lives. So let me start with brief introductions for myself and then Dr. Muir, and then I'll just quickly reference our colleague Lincoln Fish, who's on this call, and then we'll dive right into it. I will not take a tremendous amount of time on my backstory because some of you have heard it, and it is available on our website, livingwaterclinics.com. But I'm Ben. I live here in Murrells Inlet. I've been here just over 4 years now. And fell in love with this community from the very first moment me and my 3 young children and wife stepped foot in it. And over the years, I just witnessed the mental health pandemic up front and personal, whether it's through my family, whether it was through friends, whether it was through kids who were helping me coach my child in softball, parents at parent meetings, etc. And so mental health is my passion purpose. I've been very public that I had battled depression, PTSD, and anxiety for decades of my life, and always felt a calling and a nudge to do something about it. Well, that all came together in January of this year when I felt a calling and a burden placed on my heart by the Lord to roll up my sleeves and do something about it. And so what became evident to me was I had access through my relationship with Owen to bring some really unbelievably effective FDA-cleared technologies and treatments right here to the Grand Strand. And the one short statement I will say here is, in a conversation with Owen in January, and I had followed his work for a long time. We've known each other for 7, 8 years and saw what he was doing around neuromodulation. And I said to him, I said, Doc, you have unbelievable success with these treatments. Is there any reason why these can't live here? Why can't we offer these right here on the Grand Strand? And he said, no, there's no reason at all. Thus became the idea, which was the birth of Living Water, which is how do we bring these treatments here? How do we make them accessible? And how do we just bring more options to help individuals? So I am the founder and the executive director of Living Water Mental Health Brain Treatment Center. We are a nonprofit. Our 501c3 application is currently pending under review by the IRS. And we are looking to open doors in October right here on the Grand Strand. So I'll be more than happy to go into any more of that background, probably offline or separate, so you can reach to me anytime you want. But I do want to bring the literal and figurative brains of the operation front and center here. Dr. Muir, I'd ask you to provide a little more about your background and where you come into play as our medical director and the other multiple hats you wear, by the way. And I'd like to turn it over to you, please.
Hi, I'm Owen Scott Muir. I'm a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist by training. My first gig was working at my mom's nonprofit at 10. and then at 16, my mom runs a jazz camp and jazz festival in Connecticut, which is a not-for-profit for 45 years now. And at 16, I was managing 200 volunteers over a 3-day festival weekend. So just the world of not-for-profits was my family. I thought I was going to be a recording engineer, and I was sort of correct. I still do that. But what turned out to be the thing I do with my time is helping people, alleviating suffering as a physician. And I thought I was going to go and be really good at medicines and help people, and it turns out the medicines don't work very well. And so the first tool I decided to get some mastery of was psychotherapy. And I did that by going to the Anna Freud Center in the UK and becoming the first American who's certified in mentalization-based treatment. That's a psychotherapy for chronically suicidal individuals. And that was great for the people for whom it was great, but you're all therapists, right? It's not great for everybody, or you're administrators for therapists, and you're in that position where the tools aren't working. And so I had pills that didn't work. I had therapies that worked sometimes, maybe better than the pills, but I didn't have enough answers. And then I got sick. And I got an episode of depression in my 4th year of psychiatric residency that threatened to derail my career. I had child psychiatry fellowship starting at the NYU School of Medicine, which was a dream. It's one of the best programs in the country. I didn't have enough vacation time left to graduate on time, and that would have screwed everything up. So I asked my doctor, what do I do? And my doctor of 20 years said, well, I don't know if it'll work, but if it does, it's easy to recreate. There's this kooky guy uptown who's doing this brain stimulation thing. And look, maybe it'll work for you. I don't know. I said, okay, whatever, Mike, I do what you say. After the first treatment I got, I ate a full meal for the first time in months. And after 7 days later, I was back at work and graduated on time. I'm thrilled to say that in my evaluation, I had a TMS machine of my own in my clinic here in Brooklyn. Before I graduated fellowship, I did 4 years of general psychiatry residency, so I was an adult attending and child fellow, and I was running a TMS clinic at the time. My program director gave me the milestones review and said, we think you're about a little behind where you should be as a 2nd-year fellow in terms of your understanding of somatic treatments. And I nodded and said, I'll work on that, and I have. So what is this stuff we're talking about? And we'll let Ben kind of lead us into the conversation. But I came by it honestly, and I've treated more humans with the technology you're going to hear about than almost anyone else on Earth. And the other cohort I also work with at Acacia Clinics in Sunnyvale, California. So I've seen more patients treated with this than I'm responsible about 35% of all the data in OCD. And I'm an author on every accelerated transcranial magnetic stimulation paper, which means doing it faster. And so the point is getting depression or OCD to be over, and we'll talk about other indications as well, but over, in remission, like no signs or symptoms of a disease, which if you look up that definition in verse, you get the word cure, but we can't use that yet. But an effective treatment to get individuals to remission more often than not. So the worst version of the data, at least in my opinion, is around something over 50%. The best version is around 79% of patients will have remission, no more depression, over after 5 days of treatment. That's not a drug. That's non-invasive, and you don't have to talk about.
So on that cliffhanger, before we dive into what that all means, I just want to take a brief moment and introduce another colleague on this call, Lincoln Fish. So when I mentioned to you back in January, this calling on my heart, you know, God had been working behind the scenes long before I had the thought. And one of Owen's many businesses that he is involved in, and Owen, maybe you can just set this up as it pertains to Lincoln, was an organization, a company called Breakthrough 6, which, as it just so happens, was in the process of creating a business plan to plant these mental health neuromodulation centers throughout the country. And when I reached out to you and shared that this was a vision and I wanted to do it as a nonprofit and I wanted to glorify God with it, you said, well, I have the perfect vehicle to work with you on that. So you want to just take that bridge and introduce Lincoln on that side?
Sure. So I had this kooky idea, which is that mental health treatment should exist in communities that need it. And there were a bunch of bad reasons that that wasn't the case, but not a lot of good reasons it wasn't the case. And so I had to convince some responsible adults who are good at business things, I'm a doctor, not a business person, to take that contention and that data and turn it into a business plan. And so the idea was we wanted to create kind of a modular way for anybody, a not-for-profit that was dedicated to this, a for-profit business even, a hospital that wanted one of these centers to be able to have essentially all the tools that I've been using as a doctor, but with none of the need for decades of experience to bring into their community. And since I've been working in New York City, I had kind of COVID drop on my head directly. And I was running a clinic in New York where everything was this kind of hub and spoke. We had telehealth therapy, we had telehealth doctors because we didn't want to get our patients sick and dying. And we had a TMS practice and other treatments that was able to continue to run throughout the pandemic. And at the heart of May 2020, every ECT unit in the city of New York was closed. So the most effective neuromodulation without drugs treatment for depression was not available in my city. The only thing available was the work we were doing. And insurance didn't want to pay. So, they're not always enthusiastic about paying for stuff, as I'm sure you've become familiar. I was here for your team meeting. A lot of details. And so we just treated people anyway. And what we did is we took the basic science developed at Stanford of doing this 10 times a day, 5 days in a row with 50 minutes in between. And there are variations on that. But in short, we wanted people to not have to come back and forth when they could get COVID and die. And so we said, okay, screw it. We'll get paid for one of them in the day and just do it. And that led to the largest data set ever compiled, much of which is now published. And so we know in thousands of people how well this works, which is depression can be over. And Link saw this and said, ... you're up.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'll keep it super brief, guys. I'm the crazy guy out in California. I'm in San Diego, and in fact, Ben's Center is probably going to be our first one open. Our second one's actually going to be here in San Diego. But our goal is to do 200 centers over the next 3 years. We're super aggressive on this. This stuff it's a miracle. I mean, it really is. It's truly extraordinary. But I really want to emphasize that it works so incredibly well in conjunction with therapy. We're getting people to a point where they have some relief from some of the things that they've been tackling. But then when you do that, you've got to help them get, to the next phase in their life and everything. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be a part of that. I'm a healthcare veteran of 25 years. I've done a lot of different projects in the healthcare space, and I did revenue cycle for a long time, and it was great, and I loved it. And we did a lot of hospital turnarounds, but it's still, this is a chance to actually help people directly. And when I saw what was happening here, Robert, our CEO, got me involved. We worked together, and then I met Owen, and I think my first conversation with Owen, we were going to talk for 15 minutes. We ended up talking for about an hour and a half, and I just peppered the poor man with every question I could think of, and really got to understand what this is all about. And here's the really sad part. We're going to get 200 of these clinics running in 3 years. I have no doubt that we're going to accomplish that. It will still touch maybe a percent over like 3 years, maybe 1% of all the people who desperately need this. But it is so important to me to be on the leading edge of something and make this geographically and financially accessible for people. It's just wrong that the only people that have access to the very best treatments are just those who can afford it. And so it's so critical that we find ways to, we're going to constantly be evolving the treatments. We're going to be constantly evolving the model so that we can find ways to bring this to every single person who needs it eventually. And we're kind of hopefully the tip of that spear. So, and Ben is the tip of our spear. So.
Thank you, Lincoln. I appreciate that. Can everybody see my screen? Because I can't see anyone else.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Lincoln, that was absolutely perfect as a way to set up, and it's been a pleasure working and getting to know you. So, the name of this presentation, minus the backstory, is Bringing Clinically Effective Breakthrough Mental Health Treatments to the Grand Strand. And we're going to talk about neuromodulation and AI. I want to share the mission statement of Living Water because it's critical. We're all in this community, and this is going to be a community-driven approach because this impacts our community. Our goal is to glorify God by providing all those in mental health need with the latest evidence-based treatments to live a restored life in peace and free from suffering. I can't emphasize the importance of this mission statement enough, and we're going to talk about how the treatments, even the highly effective outcomes, we still need to couple this with healthy choices, healthy lifestyles, positive reinforcement. We're all in the same business where we'd like to see our patients get them better and never see them again. We know that doesn't happen for many of them, but it certainly remains our goal. So this is our mission statement. So, Doc, I'm going to go to you first here. This is kind of a general framework of this slide, but why don't you speak to these points, particularly on what the current mood disorder treatments are and addressing the points here.
Yeah. So, as a room full of therapists and folks working with therapists, you understand that patients get depressed. Sometimes we get depressed. Sometimes we're traumatized. Sometimes we have other thoughts and feelings. And I'm a child psychiatrist and actually like the narrator of every piece of medical education for like 8 years out of the Child Psychiatry Academy. And for many kids and adults, therapy is successful. But therapy is is neuromodulation. It changes your mind and changes your brain at the same time. Because what you're doing is you're reimagining how to think about stuff in a way that lets you think about it differently out in the day. It's not the work you do in the room that matters. It's what happens in your life. And so every therapist is doing this impossible task, essentially, of having to sit with somebody in a moment that doesn't matter. It's every other minute other than the ones that they're together that matters. And, we have had and continue to have this push, and you talk about psychiatrists say, oh, you're a prescriber, and they mean medicines. We have a whole generation of oral antidepressants and then another and then another. And the largest study on this was recently ripped to shreds, but I'm going to use the old numbers because they're good enough to make my point. It's suspected that the actual data is actually worse than this. But the sequenced treatment alternatives to relieve depression was a study that gave a group of people with depression over the course of about 2 years each, a series of trials of medications, starting with an SSRI and then moving to Wellbutrin and then moving to CBT and then moving to lithium augmentation, then blah, 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 4 different medication trials. And the remission rate after that first drug was 30%. And every treatment thereafter had 10% or less remission, right? And so response, a 50% reduction in symptoms, is not what we're talking about here. That wasn't good either, by the way. Remission, your depression being over in the study period, is what we're talking about. So the medicines didn't work very well. And in people who had one medicine not help, the subsequent therapy or medicine wasn't as helpful either. And so, at the end of STAR-D, again, a sunny version of this, 2 years of futzing with meds later and associated weight gain, other problems, and you have sexual side effects, and 72% of people who took the Celexa, which is the first line drug, you have about half a chance of your depression being over. Not good enough.
So enter TMS into the room in the conversation. This is a homegrown innovation. So for those of us who have palmetto state pride, which is, I'm assuming, all of us, even Lincoln and Owen, getting their palmetto state pride worked on. This was first researched and developed in the 1980s at MUSC. Dr. Muir, you had worked with a lot of people directly who had researched this and continue to research various applications. You want to talk a little bit about TMS as a homegrown innovation, how it was developed, and what continues to happen on the research side before we get into the details?
Sure. So a magnet, an electromagnet. Anyone remember physics vaguely? No, not at all. I'll do the only lesson you need. Thumb in the direction of the wire, fingers curl in the direction of a changing magnetic field current induced in the wire. I was an MCAT teacher. The neurons in your brain are functionally wires. They're long, they have insulation, and when you have a changing magnetic field, current is induced in the wires that are the neurons of your brain. So you've heard, oh, it's a chemical imbalance. That's not true, meaningfully. I mean, it may be true at a certain granularity, but the overall problem is there's a circuit problem, and the neurons are not firing in the right rhythm. And so Mark George, who is a psychiatrist at MUSC, and subsequent researchers like Dr. Nolan Williams, who was one of his trainees, my dear friend Colleen Hanlon, who is a PhD, who's now at the company Greenzweig, they were all doing research in sequence. And Mark took this work from the UK, where they took a magnetic coil, which causes a magnetic field to pass harmlessly through skin, skull, meninges, and it gets to brain, and it causes neurons to fire in a new rhythm. And then they sync up to other parts of the brain. And before that, they're not in sync, and afterwards they sync up. But this neuron that you stimulate and this neuron that's far away can sync up whether you hit this one or not. Because like a dance, you can move and your partner can figure it the heck out. They're watching you move and they're moving accordingly. And your brain's doing the same thing and people are doing the same thing. That's why therapy works. Because the dance you're doing, your patients get in sync with. And if you're thinking healthy, they start to think healthy naturally because we create models of each other in our minds. And this is a way to speed up that process of getting back in sync with the world. And what was discovered is not only can this repeated stimulation, which is mild, stingy a little bit, but when you move it to the right part of the brain, it caused symptoms to get better. And subsequent research said, oh, if we have some brain scans, we can know even more about that. We can develop wider coil arrays to not miss the spot, et cetera. But the bottom line is we figured out the code to treat different problems in the brain using these brain scans. And so there's a spot over here, which is a little bit different for everybody, for depression. Another spot over here for obsession. And there's another spot for trauma. And what you think about during the treatment can matter more and less depending on what the problem is. So when you have obsessions and you're doing the stimulation here, it helps to obsess while you're in the chair, just like therapy, right? What you think about matters. And so the story was, historically, Mark George at MUSC developed this, sticking in a bucket every 45 minutes to cool it off. Like, it was tough. And it got faster. We figured out you could do it in a pattern we borrowed from the brain itself called theta burst, which is just a pattern we ripped off from the memory center of the brain and gave it back to the brain. The brain liked it. 8.5 minutes of treatment worked 3 times better than 45 minutes of treatment in the old pattern. And when you did that, and then you did another one an hour later, it worked even better than doing it 2 days in a row. And what we discovered is that The next one, each next treatment in the day with some spacing between them, led to more and more ability to change. So 1 day of 10 treatments is the equivalent of 1 treatment a day for 36 days over 6 weeks.
Can you repeat that one more time? Because that is
Yeah.
such an impactful statistic. It warrants repetition.
Yeah. And so when we treat someone once a day for 6 weeks, 36 treatments total, we get the same brain-changing potency as 1 day of treatment where we're doing only 10, but spaced out appropriately. Science did something useful. It figured out how to do it better. Oh my God, can you believe it? Yeah. And we actually do 5 days, or and this will evolve over time, but 5 or 6 days of that, depending on the protocol.
So we're going to get into protocol in a minute. We know that there are, there's accelerated TMS, there's traditional TMS. I know it has different names as well. We're going to get into that in a moment. But if I can just go back and unpack one thing you said a little bit more. You made, one of your many videos, which by the way is available on the livingwaterclinics.com website under resources. If you like what you're hearing and you want to go deeper into podcasts and videos, please do check that out. You once gave this brilliant analogy about an orchestra where the strings are out of tune.
Yeah.
And it's not the orchestra's fault and it's not the conductor's fault, but it's the string section, and this gets it into tune.
Yeah.
Can you just share that again or go into some more detail? Because I thought that was a perfect analogy, because as someone who battled depression, and therapists on this call, you deal with this all the time with your patients, the person thinks they're just broken. They're just broken. There's not a section that's broken. I'm flawed. I've earned this. I deserve feeling this bad, or I've done something. Talk through how that can be used to positively reinforce, no, you are not broken. Only a very small section of your mind potentially is.
And so, the difference between a band that sounds good or an orchestra that sounds good and one that sounds bad is a couple different elements, right? They have to be playing in time. If they're out of time, if they're not following the conductor, it'll sound like garbage, even if everybody's a great player and even if every instrument is in tune. If the instruments are out of tune, even if one instrument is out of tune, right?
Guitar.
Disaster, right? It doesn't matter how much you practice. If you neglect the tuning, it will sound bad. And we've been telling people to practice their mood, but they're out of tune. Their brains are out of tune. And so they're getting a song that sounds bad to other people. Everyone can notice it. And so the actual answer is, well, if you don't have the fundamental tuning of the instrument that you're trying to practice on synced up appropriately, well, what do you do in music? You get an external reference. You tune it to a tuner. And that's what we're doing here. We're finding the best spot to put the tuner, and we're tuning up the circuit. And then you can go out in the world, and when you smile and someone smiles back, the right part of your brain goes, yeah, that's it. What a great day.
So let's talk about that tuning frequency. If anyone's done any research on their own, they might come across ATMS, RTMS. You talked about, the diagnosis, prescribing the treatment protocol. Can you just walk through, generally speaking, what are some of the treatment protocols? How is cadence, duration? How are these generally determined, and what do they look like?
I'm gonna keep it real general because this is a group of new folks. So when you hear TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, think medicine, right? And the word medicine. Like, do you need medicine for that problem? Yes. Yeah, but which one? Right? Should it be an antibiotic? Should it be an antidepressant? What do we do? It matters which one, right? And so the different protocols are the equivalent of the difference between, and targets, et cetera, are the difference of the different drugs. So and it's as different as antibiotics and antidepressants. Like, different protocols at different parts of the brain can do dramatically different stuff. So the goal for Breakthrough 6, which is why we're working with so many independent centers, is to gather the data to know which protocol is going to be the best for which person. Because there are a bunch of options, and I build tools using artificial intelligence for many years, like before it was cool. Before ChatGPT, at least. And so what I figured out about 8 years ago at a lunch with my friend Dan is that we could gather data from video. We could combine that data with brain scan data, some of which we're going to be using and some of which we don't need to, and figure out who's going to respond and to what. And that means that the question of should we do it 10 times a day? Should we do it 5 times a day? Should we do it on the left or the right? For any individual person, that's the goal, is following people's experience, using the unblinking eye of artificial intelligence video and audio capture, and create a system of a hypothetical diagnosis. We don't have to assume we understand the problem. We have to look at what happens and back solve for what the problem was in their brain. And given we're actually stimulating the brain directly, we're using that science to guide our treatment prospectively. Not yet. I mean, we start with physician judgment. That's the bottom line. And then we move to more help for those physicians. It's like, full self-driving mode is a long way off in your car. It's probably a while off in this, but is it something worth working for and towards? Yes. And I can't imagine doing anything else with my time.
So you mentioned the diagnosing using AI. It was very top level. If you have questions on that, you could ask now or you could ask later, but that's something I know you've been using for some time. Talk through, when our therapists on this call are watching, who is typically a good or not a good candidate. I gave some examples: age, condition, medical history. Give us some guideposts here.
So contraindications, who cannot get this treatment? And for example, if you're doing a quiz for CME, this is the kind of thing that'll be crucial to understand. If you have iron-containing metal in your head, this is a giant magnet. Don't do that. Now, there's many metals that actually don't conduct electricity in that way, like titanium. And you're therapists, not doctors. But a question is like, does this person have a cochlear implant? That's a no. Did they get shot with a bullet from a, Civil War reenactment kit? It's probably some steel in that ball. We're gonna say no in your head, right? If it's down here, it doesn't matter. It's too far away. Those are the rare contraindications. Epilepsy, we have to change the protocol. And other treatments, we'd have to do things differently. But the absolute contraindications is, iron-containing metal in your head, and you don't have to be sure. We can check on that and have to as part of our diligence for folks. Those are the absolute contraindications. It's, a magnet will kill you.
Thank you, Doc. And we'll be aware of the Civil War ball and firing mechanism. Going back real quickly, you obviously have talked a lot about depression. We talked about OCD, but generally speaking, going into potentially good candidates, of course, what kind of mood disorders do you think make someone a good enough candidate to go through the diagnostic as a starting point?
And so the exciting thing about Living Water is that we don't just have TMS. I'm talking about TMS because it makes for one coherent talk, but we have other forms of neuromodulation using, say, EEG neurofeedback, where we're just reading your brainwaves. There's no magnet involved. So essentially, if someone's suffering and they haven't responded to treatment, we're willing to check it out. Best candidates: depression, obsession, and PTSD. That's what we have the most robust data for. Bipolar disorder, think it works, have less data. Psychotic disorder, limited data. So I would be thinking non-psychotic mood disorders first: obsession, anxiety, anxious depression. And in individuals with substance use disorders, we have less evidence, although we have an FDA approval for smoking cessation. We have less evidence in the primary treatment of those illnesses, though we're getting there. But treating someone's depression, which is hard to treat because of their addiction, or is contraindicated in one med and another and blah, 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 worth a shot in an evaluation, because practically those folks are suffering and they might die, and I don't want that, and neither do you.
Thank you, Doc. We're talking a little about patient experience and side effect profile. Not only have you been a patient, but obviously you've administered, probably one of certainly the top three, I would venture.
I've been a patient. I was a patient first.
No, I'm saying you've been a patient, but you've also administered, one of the most as well. And for people on this call, part of my just passion and interest is I am also going to be trained as a technician to deliver TMS and others at Living Water. I want to be directly involved from the non-medical perspective on the patient experience and standard of care, and couple that with Owen's medical standard of care and his best practice, and tailor it to our community and towards our mission. So I'm excited to get through that and certainly share my experiences. But Owen, for people on this call, hey, what does it feel like? What are potential side effects?
So if anyone here has been to a high ropes course, I took my kids to one in Costa Rica, right? They're not doctors strapping you in. Jorge does a really good job of giving you some general safety instructions and making sure you're on belay, and then you go zooming across a forest, and that's got some risk profile, right? Not everyone does well with that experience. Some people freak out and they have to bring them down a long road, right? There's some risk and danger. But we do much more dangerous things all day, driving a car. You get in the car with your friend and you let them drive and you let them talk to you while they're driving. Oh my God. So every day we do things that are dangerous that are not medical. If I were to pitch McDonald's to you, so we're going to take thousands of centers and we're going to have people basically off the street take searing hot metal and prepare animals that we slaughtered again from all over the world. And we're going to pair them after we put those animal pieces on burning hot metal next to potatoes that we've dipped in boiling oil. We're going to let teenagers do that bit. And then we're going to put that together and sell it for $1. Who's in?
My AI sarcasm bot is slightly going off here. Maybe it has to be better tuned.
You let people do bonkers things. This is vastly safer than anything I just described. What it feels like is like a woodpecker banging on your baseball helmet, which nobody has had happen, but it's probably the closest description. It's not comfortable. In the beginning, it can be painful, and almost nobody discontinues the treatment because of discomfort. Every day, it's calibrated to your brain to make sure we're giving you the right dose for that person for that day. And the potential side effects are headache, fatigue, some scalp tenderness can be the case. Extremely rarely ringing in the ears or tinnitus. And you can have a seizure. I've seen it happen 5 times in my career of well over 100,000 treatments, but the protocol we're going to be using at Living Water has never had a seizure associated with it. It's worth noting that seizure is a treatment for depression in the form of electroconvulsive therapy, which this is not, right? So it's not ECT. We're not inducing seizures. We're really working hard to not have a seizure happen, but it's about 100 times less likely to cause a seizure than Prozac. The Prozac seizure, by the way, happens when you're walking down the street or driving your car. This would happen in the office in front of the basic life support trained clinician with a doctor on call. So it's just dramatically safer than any other treatment we have in psychiatry, with the possible exception of therapy. And frankly, for the technician and doctor, it's more emotionally safe than therapy because it sucks to do trauma therapy. For the therapist, it's nice to do something helpful, but all that secondary exposure to people suffering isn't free for you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if there is that extremely rare seizure, it stops immediately once you press the stop button on the machine.
I've never seen it not stop in 2 seconds, and I've seen more of them than most people.
So on that note, let us take a quick pause here. We have about 15, 18 minutes left and just a few slides to go, but I want to pause to see if there are any questions. We've covered a lot of ground so far, and I just want to give the audience an opportunity to ask anything that was addressed so far to this point.
What's the age on it?
And so that just got expanded. It's a great question. There's now an FDA, and these are all FDA labels. So there's FDA approval for, or clearance rather, because it's a device, for adolescents down to, I think, 15 was their clearance. I've treated kids down to 10. And Greenzweig, one of our partners, has a device that's cleared up to age 86.
So just to reiterate, you say you have treated people as young as 10, and we are, and there's FDA clear up to 86, correct?
Correct. FDA, like bottom of that window is, I think, 15. I have to double check that.
Right.
And that was based on thousands. So that's a strange approval because it was done based on post-marketing research of well over 1,000 adolescents. So many, many young people, many, many, many adults, and it is, it's been, there's more published data on this than in a wider range of people than most things you're used to working on.
I have a question related, which I've asked you before, so I know the answer, but I'm going to pretend I don't know the answer and ask the question fresh, which is, What about, and there's a question on payment. We will get to that, I promise you, because obviously that's pretty critical. What about individuals who are on antipsychotic meds? Do they have to stop them? Any medicines they can't be on? Talk us through that.
We don't change the meds.
Jen?
No, you don't have to stop them. You can keep taking the meds, antidepressants, antipsychotics, benzos, whatever it is. We don't change the meds during the course of treatment.
And of course, like this would all be, you would all do an intake and everything that would verify what this person's taking, ensure that they're appropriate. But we can kind of maybe do things on our end to weed out some of that and be like, is this person appropriate or not? Knowing they have a bullet in their head from the, you know, whatever, right?
Their head. If they're binge drinking and then abruptly stopping,
Right.
right? Don't abruptly stop on day 3 of treatment, which I've had happen. Despite the warning. Anything that's gonna, like, if you're binge drinking every day, keep binge drinking every day. Don't change it. But don't abruptly stop a benzo or stop alcohol in the course of the treatment. That would be dangerous.
Of course.
So we're going to get back to the payment question because we end on that. And there are just 3 more slides I want to make sure, 4 more slides we get to with our time. So I will go back here and mindful of our time at this point. Sorry, I have a very sticky keyboard. Doc, how well does it work? You mentioned the percentages earlier, but let's just go over what is our potential, what's our outcomes data look like for TMS and or PRISM, which we'll get to.
Yeah. So the bottom line is, in this trial, the S&T trial, they're actually, I think this is the 3rd or 4th trial in psychiatry that was stopped early because it was deemed unethical to continue to give sham treatment to study subjects. Right. So if you're doing a study, at the middle of the study, they do an interim data safety analysis. And usually they stop studies because the intervention, oh my God, it's caused some awful thing, and we have to stop. In this trial, they stopped at the midpoint because the active treatment was so effective, it was deemed unethical to continue to give study subjects sham compared to it. And so that huge difference you see in Hamilton rating scales for depression on the vertical axis and the endpoint, there was only 5 days of treatment in that first week, and the active treatment was remarkably better. This has been replicated in large-scale data sets. So we treat people with ADHD, we treat people with autism. Historically, there may be some modifications for that, but cognitive improvement is a side effect of this treatment. There may be some differential response in autism, as is frequently the case. Actually, the lead author on this SAINT paper, Stanford Neuromodulation Treatment, the brand name is SAINT, is a neuropsychologist who looked at autism first. So we know a little bit more about cortical excitability in autism subjects. And patients.
On that note, we did just get a question, which I'm going to read. What about developmental disorders?
That's what I was speaking to.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure that you saw that.
Yeah. So we don't have data that it doesn't work. We have some data to suggest it might work a little differently. But then again, that's also true for medicines. So is it worth trying? Yes.
Okay. You mentioned this earlier. I'm sure everyone on this call would like to hear your thoughts on the relationship between TMS and therapy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a therapist at the end of the day, and I'm a therapy supervisor. I try to teach people how to do therapy slightly more effectively. And therapy is about trust, but it's also about change and managing that change. And so what TMS does is it unlocks the ability to change. But honestly, it's weird, right? It's not going to come as news to this room that personality disorders exist and can get in the way of change. And so just because your depression is over doesn't mean you have no problems. It may mean you have different problems to tackle. And that's what your therapist is there to help you do. I would argue group therapy will become yet more important. And most of the things that this can treat are not personality disorders, though they actually don't get in the way. We have published data on that. It's not like narcissism makes it not work. So that's good to know, right? Borderline personality disorder, just as effective for their co-occurring depression. Individuals with OCPD, it actually might be a treatment. I have some data to suggest that. But we just don't know yet. We do know that people have problems and need to change. And when you can have a little bit of an easier time changing, well, that means you can do some good therapy to help people get back to their life.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please, if you have a question,
I was
that's what
just
we're here
gonna
for.
say, I'm almost thinking of this as like another alternative. Like I have a client I'm thinking of that I've been working with for some time that seems to be very medication resistant and personality disorder, but the depression is so astounding, right? And it sounds like it's not going to cure the personality disorder, but really it's going to help allow this person to open up and be able to work on those pieces
Yeah.
because it's really targeting the depression. Am I getting that right?
That is the best understanding of the current state of the evidence. Yes.
Wonderful.
So Owen, you've talked about this briefly about other neuromodulation treatments we're going to be bringing to living water. Do you want to briefly talk about PRISM?
Yeah. So one of the problems with TMS research, although this is changing like next month, is we had bad data on PTSD treatment. And the bad data is fascinating because it actually suggested we had figured out a fundamental brain mechanism for post-traumatic stress disorder, but tweaked it in the wrong direction. And so the TMS treatment, it didn't make people worse, but it made them get less better from the therapy than they got with therapy alone, like statistically significantly less improvement. So we had changed how the learning worked, and that was disappointing, but also kind of fascinating. And so the way that PRISM works is you're wearing that EEG cap and you're playing a video game with your brain. And what they did is they took the same brain scans that they trained TMS on, not the identical ones, but similar methodology, and they trained it on this EEG data. So we're able to look at the amygdala, that fear center of the brain. And by playing the video game, you downregulate your fear, which is what we hope trauma therapy is doing too. We want people to be less jumpy in the world. But this does it without having to talk about it, which is pretty sweet. And it also helps depression in those same individuals. So the effect size of this, like if it was a medicine for height, how much taller would it make you is about 2.5 inches. Whereas like a medicine for PTSD would at best be like 0.63 inches or something like that. I think that's the medicine doesn't work very well. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's when therapy isn't enough, this may be another way of changing your brain that makes that process more effective. And they're developing subsequent treatments for this that I can't talk about yet, but are exciting. And many of the same minds who are involved in developing TMS are also involved in that research. And that's an FDA cleared treatment already. I had the founder at my home for dinner, and he's a delightful person.
Well,
This
let's take that hook and reverse this slide, which is additional conditions. We certainly, Living Water has shared research, which you certainly acknowledge as interesting and exciting, but we're talking about clinical trials right now for, talk us through Alzheimer's, we're talking about potential stroke victims. I know that research is just about to start. Talk about some potential future conditions currently under research for TMS and possibly PRISM.
Yeah, so there's some I'm not PRISM. I'll just say we have data on ADHD, and I can't talk about the other research yet. But if you can imagine, you can change one brain area. You can imagine you could change others. Not everything's going to work for every person. Some of the research I'm doing is around avoiding side effects from antipsychotic medications. So using that video screener, and some of this is published already, and other we're preparing. But we trained an AI model to detect that movement disorder, tardive dyskinesia. If you've seen patients on antipsychotics, involuntarily,
Yes.
that's not good. So I built a tool that can diagnose that, or at least risk stratify that with an accuracy. We use a term called area under the curve, and 1 is the best you can possibly get. And ours works between 0.85 and 0.98. So it may be the best psychiatry AI ever developed. And we're using that same methodology in Breakthrough 6 to diagnose which condition should get which treatment. The other thing we're working on, highly relevant to your setting, is assessment of opiate use disorder and guiding induction of buprenorphine, especially in people using high potency fentanyl related compounds. And so we're using a combination of video capturing pupil changes and an infrared sensor that reads blood flow in the brain. So we can titrate or guide the titration of an induction of buprenorphine to kind of automate the withdrawal monitoring. And so that's in the pipeline, and that's using some of the same core technologies we're using to determine which TMS goes to whom. in the pipeline for TMS, we have Alzheimer disorder, which is not curative, but it, nothing else is either. Parkinson's is in the pipeline. PTSD is more and more publications are coming out. And the most important thing is these are rapid acting treatments, right? In 5 days, you could be in remission from your depression, and that's life-changing. And bipolar depression, which has very few good medication options, again, there's more data coming out, and we're looking forward to those processes moving forward. But we're unlocking the brain's connections to itself, and that's hopeful. And it also creates a whole new set of problems for people. Like, now that I'm not depressed, oh my gosh, I'm married to the wrong person. And we've seen that. We've seen divorces after this treatment because, like, not a joke. Like, it's not trivial. Like,
Yeah, like that makes so much sense.
but it's a big enough change that you can recognize you need to get divorced.
So
So,
I want to ask, just in the interest of time, and we can go over a couple minutes if people are available, but I wonder if people do have 12 o'clock sessions. I do want to talk about the payment portion because we are a nonprofit that does, we do see a lot of people that do not have a lot of financial resources. I mean, that's why Roberta and Ron Bogle started the center, was to offer these mental health resources to our community and be able, to support everyone in our community more in a more holistic way. So I want to understand, like, I understand your nonprofit. We need funds before we can fund scholarships or things for people before you all can do that. But could we talk just a little bit about that so we have an expectation? So if we do have someone that has the financial resources now, they can't, can they engage in these services?
Owen, you want to
In
take that first?
October when you open, I'm sorry.
And so you'll remember when we talked about this, I mentioned, like, the reason we know this works in this way is because I just ignored getting paid. I wasn't a nonprofit. I just went broke. Right. So practically, there's some insurance that covers, as of July 1st, they cover 2 treatments a day. And I mentioned that, like, 5 a day or 10 a day, right? So more is better. And that change has literally happened this year, and I expect to see more. There are additional CPT codes, or current procedural terminology codes, which you got lots of overview on in your team meeting, and I'm right there with you, to describe doing this 10 times a day with the brain scan. And there's some Medicare coverage for that. And so I spend a lot of time advocating for these payment models. What I can say at the same time is, one of the visions we had with Breakthrough 6 was to enable people like Ben to build innovative models for payment. And so with documented financial hardship, we have we have both some insurance that is already paying for some of this and soon to be more. Some of it twice a day is paid for routinely by insurances if people meet the criteria. But, those criteria are not designed to get everyone well. They're designed to gatekeep a treatment. Right? Just like your therapy is gate kept, and our goal at Living Water is not to do that. So there is a documented financial hardship scale that we just ripped off from hospitals that have to do it anyway to keep their not-for-profit status, and we decided some version of that is going to be helpful, and I'll let Ben go from there.
Yeah, as a nonprofit, my goal is for those who can't afford it, great. We want to present the solution and do my very best to Robin Hood it for people who can't. It seems very similar to other nonprofit models, including yours, as well as through charity donations, grants as well, to try to offset our costs as much as humanly possible. On the self-pay side, a lot of those models that Owen talked about, Lincoln, who actually I spent a lot of time with the other day going through, where can we lean out, not on the care, of course, but on the operations as much as possible to bring our price down to a point on the self-pay side where it can be affordable. And my goal is to get, the 50-course treatment, as close to a copay per treatment as possible. Copays are between, $50 to $100, depending on your insurance. Sometimes they're $125, sometimes they're $75. But my goal is based upon your income, to get it to a point, if you're on the lower end of that income scale, somewhere around 400% or so of the poverty line, to get it to a point where it's somewhere around a per copay per treatment. I think that puts us somewhere in the $3,500, $3,700 over a 50-course treatment. Again, if you qualify financial hardship, 400% poverty scale on that side. And then those numbers do increase on the self-pay side, of course, as you go up to 7, 8, 1100% over the federal poverty line. So that's just me being fully transparent, nonprofit to nonprofit on the goal.
And can I
really
share something?
Yes,
Can I-
please. Go ahead, Lincoln.
So we're doing a kind of a unique thing here in San Diego. I'm working on it right now with a couple of different veterans groups, and because there's so much depression and PTSD, there are 21,000 veteran suicides a year. What we're doing here is we have we're going to be doing a sliding scale as you are there, and the people who are on the upper end of that scale are actually going to be paying us for treatment, but then earmarking, we're going to say, okay, you can afford more. We're going to take part of that, and you're not going to pay it to us. You're going to pay it to this veterans group, and it's going to be specifically earmarked for a treatment at the center. So then we turn around and give a discounted treatment to a veteran. The people getting the treatments, who are the high net worth people getting the treatments, love it because they get a tax write-off. The foundation has money flowing through them, so they love it. And on our end, we can give discounted treatments, basically keep the machines running and treat as many people as we possibly can all the time. So.
Thank you, Lincoln. And that's another great model that once we are up and running, we are going to explore every potential way. Listen, we'd all love to give this away to free for everybody. I'm sure you would love to give your services away for free. You have responsibilities in mortgage and children and life, which they also don't accept free as currency, which is just the world that we live in and we understand. But the goal is, again, as I mentioned, Living Water's purpose as a nonprofit is to get this treatment to as many people as possible. For those who can't afford it, great. And as I mentioned, Robin Hood our way to those who can't afford it. But I would also be remiss if I can in our last minute or so that another goal is education. And education is key. So we also are going to be in the community as much as possible to educate people on mental health, breaking the stigma of both diagnosis and treatment. We are a treatment we feel very confident in, but we are not here to tell people this is the only one you need to do. So that is part of our two-tier strategy as a nonprofit. And I think we're just at time. So Ileana, if you want to give it to
briefly
Owen.
mention, I'm gonna wrap
I'm
up.
getting it to you to close
Yeah,
it
go
out.
ahead.
So
You
there
guys can, if you want to speak for another, couple of minutes, that's okay. If people need to leave, they can hop off. They can view the rest of the recording after.
I mean, it's quick, which is, hey, remember that change from once a day to twice a day that just happened that I just mentioned just now? That happened because we did all this prior work and published that data. And so while we're intending to be charitable and to work with existing payment models in the best way we can, the goal is very much to change those models to accommodate full payment Medicare, Medicaid for everyone. And data is the way that gets done.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. Other than just expressing our complete appreciation for this opportunity, I would say please follow us online and on Instagram. We post all of our updated information on our opening, on our data, on the journey that we're doing right there. On behalf of Dr. Muir and myself and Lincoln, I'm just incredibly grateful, Ileana, to you and your colleagues on this call for giving us this opportunity. This is what we have to do. We have to educate the entire community, from the therapists to other behavioral health professionals. We're talking to PCPs, we're talking to Thailands, we're talking to community groups, we're talking to churches. We need to educate, because unless individuals can understand that it's okay to not be okay, it's okay to seek treatment, they're not going to seek treatment. So we recognize we have these roadblocks and these hurdles that we need to overcome, but it is our mission to get people well and to hopefully be an opportunity for them, provide an opportunity for them to live in peace. So on that note, Ileana, I'll hand it back to you with, again, tremendous appreciation to have the chance to speak to everybody here today.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the two of you making yourselves so available to offer this. I know there was several clinicians when we had mentioned it that expressed interest. So I think this was very helpful and giving a platform for conversation around this. And we certainly want to support, we're not in competition with anyone. We want to work together to help our mission to bring hope and healing to mind, body, and relationships. So this is part of that. And so I appreciate, having another resource that we can call upon and refer people to and work with. So keep us posted, of course, on, I don't know, as being on the board, but if anyone, and I'll make sure I shared the slides already, but if anyone wants to get in touch with them and have conversations directly and whatnot, Ben presented that, you're more than welcome to reach out to him at any time for clarification or just to meet and talk about this. And so just feel free to do that. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll keep you posted on any updates with this as well, just so that way we can have another resource for our clients that we're serving. So thank you both so very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. And I hope everyone has a fabulous weekend with a lot of self-care and rest.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.